How do you ignore files with ESLint? Imagine working on a big JavaScript project and suddenly getting overwhelmed by warnings and errors from files that don't even need checking. That's where ignoring files with ESLint comes in handy. If you want to keep your linting focused and your workspace clean, knowing how to tell ESLint which files to skip is essential. The most common way is by creating a special file called eslintignore. This file lives in your project's root folder. Inside, you list patterns that match files or folders you want ESLint to ignore. For example, if you want to skip all JavaScript files in a folder called build, you'd add build/****JS. Each line is a pattern, and ESLint reads this file before starting to check your code. If a file matches one of the patterns, ESLint skips it. You can also add comments starting with hash to organize or explain your ignore rules. You can also use negation patterns with an exclamation mark. If you want to ignore most files but include some specific ones, you can add a pattern like src/main JS to re-include that file even if it matches a previous ignore pattern. Remember, only one eslintignore file is used, and it should be in your project's main folder. It works just like a gitignore file, which many people are familiar with. Another way is to set ignore patterns directly in your ESLint configuration file, which might be called eslint config.js. Here, you can use the ignores property or the global ignores function. For example, you can write global ignores config/* to tell ESLint to skip everything inside the config folder. This method is good if you want to keep your ignore rules close to your main configuration. If you prefer to ignore files temporarily or only in certain parts of your code, you can add special comments inside your JavaScript files. To ignore an entire file, put /ESLintDisable at the very top. To disable specific rules, add /ESLintDisable no console. When you want to turn rules back on later in the file, add /ESLintEnable no console. These inline comments give you quick control without changing your ignore files. Finally, if you run ESLint from the command line, you can use the ignore pattern option. For example, typing npx ESLint, ignore pattern config will skip all files in the config folder for that run. This is useful for one-time checks or testing. Knowing how to ignore files with ESLint helps you keep your focus on the code that matters most. It saves time, reduces false warnings, and keeps your development environment smooth. Whether through the ignore file, configuration, inline comments, or command line options, you have many ways to tell ESLint what to skip. Mastering these options makes your linting process more efficient and tailored to your project.